Hi, Darren.
Good morning, Chairperson. Good morning,
Oh,
honorable members and colleagues.
yes, I think we are ready to. Hi, Musa. Are you ready to start?
Good morning, Chairperson. How are you?
Hi, siyaphila. Singaqala.
Singaqala sihlalo.
Masu ready wena siyayifisa.
Sengiredi, Chair.
Okay. Honorable members, good morning. Support staff of the committee, Financial and Fiscal Commission, members of the press on the platform, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. We are starting the meeting of the Standing Committee on Appropriation. This is a follow-up to the budget which was presented by the minister. As you will recall, last week we had presentations from the PPO Parliamentary Budget Office. So would like to hear what FFC has for us as a way of guiding the committee as it deals with the appropriations bill and the supplementary bill. You are all welcome. There's an agenda in front of us. Are there any apologies?
Yes, Chairperson, we received apologies from Ms. Languini and from Mr. Mare.
Okay, let's note those apologies. Can we proceed with our meeting?
Most definitely, Chairperson.
Thank you very much. So we'll be
Sorry,
taking.
Chairperson. Sorry,
Yes.
before you proceed, an apology on behalf of Mr. Kwankwa just came in.
Okay, thank you. Let's note those apologies. We'll then be taking the presentation from the FFC, after which we'll have discussions and then deal with the minutes of the 4th and the 5th May 2021. I take it that Commissioner Sex is leading the team. FFC, you are welcome. We'll give you 1 hour maximum, and then we'll take it from there. FFC.
Good morning, Chairperson, honorable members. Let me apologize for Commissioner Sachs not being with us. He has prior work commitments today. I'm Elsbie Rockman.
My apologies. I took it for granted that it's him who's leading the team, but you're most welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's no problem. I'm Elsbie Rockman. I'm a part-time commissioner of the FFC and was asked to lead the delegation today. Now, we make this submission on the 2021 Appropriation and Special Appropriations Bill in terms of Section 2141 of the Constitution and Section 35 of the Intergovernmental Fiscal Relations Act 1997, as well as Section 4 of the Money Bills Amendment Procedure and Related Matters Act, as amended. I will only make a few brief introductory remarks, and then we will hand over to our team of researchers who will take us through the detailed presentation. Now, the bills is considered at a time when the economy is starting to show slight signs of recovery, albeit not on the same scale as pre-COVID growth rates. But we need to remind ourselves that prior to the outbreak of the COVID pandemic, South Africa's economy was already in recession. Our sovereign rate was about to be downgraded to sub-investment level, poverty was deepening, and unemployment was escalating. And the impact of the anticipated escalation of poverty, inequality, and unemployment, the necessity for the management of the pandemic in the health sector, and the state of SOEs contribute substantially to set the backdrop against which the bills under consideration have been formulated. Now, the stated purpose of the 2021 budget is to strike a balance between economic recovery and restoring public finances, as alluded to in the 2020 MTBPS. It is expected that the four major priorities outlined in the 2021 SONA are expressed in the legislation under consideration. Now, briefly, we know that the focus areas or priorities remain the coronavirus pandemic, the containment and management thereof, accelerating economic recovery, implementing economic reforms to create sustainable jobs and drive inclusive growth through the economic reconstruction and recovery plan, and to fight corruption and strengthen the state. Now, our presentation today focuses on the fiscal framework and the appropriation bill, the context within which the appropriation bill is tabled, major revisions and innovations contained in the 2021 appropriation bill, looking at adjustments to votes and the implications thereof, as well as key risks and opportunities, infrastructure allocations, state-owned entities, and then we comment on the special appropriation bill, specifically in the areas of health, social development, and public enterprises. Now, our team of researchers who will be doing the presentation includes Ms. Sasha Peters, Sianda Jonas, Eddie Rakabi, and Tandu Ngozo. And I hand over to Ms. Peters, and they will run consecutively through the presentation. And then we will close and hopefully engage further with members on the presentation. Thanks very much, Chairperson.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee and other colleagues. Chair, please may I request to be able to share my screen?
Please.
Okay, got it. Sianda, I think Commissioner Rockman has covered the intro, so you may begin with the slide 5, please. Sianda?
Sorry about that, I was on mute. Good morning, Chairperson and
Good morning, Senator.
honorable members. So this offers a broad overview of the 2021 Division of Revenue.
Sianda,
hello?
Take it to slide. There you go. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So this gives an overview of the 2021 Division of Revenue. Okay. And what we're seeing is that the total national appropriation by vote is reduced by 2.3 billion in the 2021 budget. And when you look at the provincial equitable share and conditional grants, they were adjusted downwards by 50.3 billion and 2.2 billion from the 2020 to the 21 Division of Revenue, respectively. And in comparison between the 2020 and 21 budget, the revenue shortfall for the 2021-22 financial year is estimated at 133 billion. Next slide, please. So this is the context within which the budget is tabled. There are already signs of economic recovery that are beginning to emerge. We see that in the third quarter, the GDP contracted by 6% on a year-on-year basis. And in the fourth quarter, it has also contracted by 4.1 on a year-on-year basis. This is probably one of the steepest or deepest contraction that we've experienced since the dawn of democracy. And it presents a very tough and challenging environment within which the budget is tabled. Next slide, please. Then when we look at the gross fixed capital formation, that is investment, we are seeing a recovery as well. but it is worrying that the trend has been, there's been a low level of investment, and the COVID pandemic further worsened the situation, wherein in the second quarter of 2020 there was a 25% decrease in gross fixed capital formation. But also we're seeing a recovery, although it is not a quick recovery. We're seeing a recovery wherein we see that on a year-on-year basis in the fourth quarter, gross fixed capital formation contracted by 16.7%. And this you see that it mimics, or it follows the GDP trend. It's showing a similar trend. And we make an observation that although there are signs of a recovery, it may take time for the economy to recover to pre-COVID-19 output levels. Next slide, please. Okay. Given the challenges that we've cited of low GDP and low levels of investment, these have also, deepened the crisis of unemployment. We've seen that unemployment increased in the fourth quarter to 32.5%, which adds into the challenge of unemployment and how it has been persistent. And this presents a difficult challenge for the budget as it tries to address some of these challenges and some of these structural challenges that are faced by the economy, which also include high levels of unemployment. Next slide, please. I'll hand over back to Sasha to continue.
Thank you, Sianda. Chair and members of the committee, this section summarizes changes to some of the key votes, and we do it by functional category and by illustrating what the allocations were pre-COVID. And those are highlighted by the first two bars in the figure there. And they cover first the audited 2019 allocations, and then the second reddish bar there indicates the 2020-21 main budget figures, which reflects what was tabled at the time of the February 2020 budget. So just before the COVID-19 pandemic hit in South Africa. And then the green bar shows the revised estimates for 2020-21. And then that last bar shows what is being proposed as per the appropriation bill we're discussing today. So the first figure on that slide shows changes to the key social services. So we've included the basic education, health, social development, and we've also slotted the higher education vote in there. In respect of basic education, when you compare the proposed 2021 allocation to what was allocated in 2019, and again, what was allocated at the time of the February 2020 budget, as well as the 2020-21 revised estimate, we see that real growth is being maintained. And just to indicate that when we speak about real growth, it's when we factor in the effects of inflation. Now, when we look at the higher education and training vote, you can see on that figure that in nominal monetary terms, the proposed 2021 allocation shows slight recovery when compared to the 2020-21 revised estimate. So it's that purple bar relative to the green bar, but this does not take us back to the path, and a much stronger path that we were on at the time of the February 2020 budget. So if one looks at the figures, and we analyzed some of the figures in the higher education vote, it appears there that transfers to your TVETs and NSFAS will be affected there. With respect to health, which has been at the forefront of the fight against the COVID pandemic, the allocation progressively increases across the period, and real growth is maintained whether you compare the proposed 2021 allocation to what was allocated back in 2019, or at the time of the February budget or the revised estimate. With respect to social development, we'll recall that we witnessed a ramping up of allocations due to the response required when COVID-19 hit. and the need for income and various other forms of support were required and fell on this department. So as we see the temporary grants being phased out, we expect to see a bit of a decline in allocation to this department, but it must be noted that the decline is also set to affect the real value of the various social grants. The second graph there, the one at the bottom, provides a look at allocations to human settlements and cooperative governance votes. With respect to human settlements in nominal monetary terms, the proposed 2021 allocation seems to put us back onto the path that we were at the time of the February 2020 budget. Looking at cooperative governance, much of the allocation to this vote comprises the local government equitable share allocation to municipalities. And members will recall that when the pandemic struck, additional support was provided to municipalities. So it is perhaps not surprising then to see that with the 2021 allocation, there is a slight drop in allocations to that vote. But what is good or positive to note is that when you look in real terms, the allocation to this vote, when you compare it to what was allocated at the time of 2019 and at what was allocated at the time of the February 2020 budget, the allocation to this vote shows real growth. Let me just go to the next slide. This slide looks at similar allocations as in the last slide, but in respect of a few of the economic development votes. And looking at the top figure there, it includes agriculture, water and sanitation, and transport. And when we look at agriculture and water and sanitation votes, we see a recovery in allocations for 2021-22 relative to allocations as per the 2020-21 revised estimates. But the recovery does not put us back on the path we were at the time of the February 2020 budget, so that reddish color bar. Relative to what was allocated to these votes at the time of the February 2020 budget, what we are seeing in the appropriation bill represents now a real decline. On the other hand, in respect of the transport vote, real growth is being projected for 2021-22. And this real growth is evident when you compare what will be allocated in the appropriations vote relative to what was allocated at the time of the February 2020 budget, as well as the revised estimates of 2020. Looking at the figure at the bottom, we see that while tourism was heavily deprioritized with the onset of the pandemic and the subsequent lockdown period, the proposed allocation for 2021, which is in this appropriation bill, it goes a long way in trying to reverse that reduction. And we see really significant real growth being projected now for that vote. However, it must be noted that when we compare this, what's being proposed in the appropriation bill relative to what the sector was getting at the time of the February 2020 budget, we have not actually put it back onto that path. In real growth terms, the allocation being proposed in the appropriation bill reflects a decline of around 5% when compared to what was allocated at the time of the February budget. This slide shows similar graphs again, but in respect of selected votes in the peace and security functional group. And at the bottom, we have some of the votes within the general public services category. But looking at that top graph, and the peace and security related votes, a number of them are seeing a consistent drop over the period looked at. So relative to votes in other functional groups, the votes in this group appear to be deprioritized in the 2021 appropriation bill, especially defense, correctional services, police, and home affairs. When we compare the 2021-22 allocations for all 3 of these votes to what was allocated in 2019, the February 2020 budget, or the 2020-21 revised estimate, those votes show a real decline. So we know that correctional services, police, defense, these are all labor-intensive departments. So it's likely that filling of posts will be affected there. And in the case of Home Affairs, this department is responsible for maintaining both the national population register and regulating the movement of persons through ports of entry. So it's one we think that the committee should understand how this vote will manage or absorb this decline in its budget. The bottom figure there shows selected votes in the general public services cluster. And generally what we see there is that most of the votes in that cluster recover relative to allocations as per the 2020-21 revised estimates. We've also provided some thoughts on the key risks and opportunities that we face as this bill will be enacted. In terms of the risks, the most obvious and pressing risk is, of course, that the reductions are affecting so many of the votes, and it's likely to have a negative effect on service delivery, especially by departments such as, say, police or social development. And the view of the FFC is, and I think this was raised when we presented on the Division of Revenue Bill as well, is that departments need to clarify exactly how they will manage the reductions and be clear on what will need to be sacrificed to absorb these reductions. So yeah, it's important that Parliament should receive regular reporting on the implications of these budget cuts. Again, another big and pressing risk is around the wage issue and the fact that much of the reductions are being premised on the assumption that the wage freeze announced in the budget will be implemented. And this is, of course, a risk, as we are not yet sure how this will play out. The third risk we put there relates to some of the votes that are crucial and directly related to kickstarting growth. And the fact that despite the emphasis placed on economic reconstruction and the economic recovery plan, these votes, if you take, for example, the trade, industry and competition vote, there's a significant real decline in what is being allocated in the 2021 appropriation bill relative to what was allocated in both the 2019 and 2020 February budgets. Similarly, with respect to the small business vote, which receives about 0.2% of the total amount available for appropriation to the votes. So these votes should be sort of at the forefront of helping to kickstart growth and develop small businesses. They have quite big mandates attached to them, but whether the figures and allocations and growth rates match that is quite questionable. So this slide provides some ideas as to opportunities that can be further explored. Firstly, whilst the current situation is dire, it does represent an opportune time to really separate out the ineffective and duplicated programs and activities from those that actually do add value. You know, we also need to ensure that we concentrate our focus on programs and initiatives that can assist given our current context. So programs that we can derive value from and that have the potential to facilitate growth and recovery. And here we suggest that these expenditure reviews be linked to the broader reconstruction and recovery plan. We also think that an opportunity lies in that Parliament can assist in terms of using its oversight role when it comes to the expenditure and delivery plans of the various departments and interrogating them in terms of links to the recovery plan. Chair, with your permission, I'll hand over to my colleague Eddie Rakabe to take us through the next section. Thank you.
Thanks. Good morning, Chairperson. Good morning, honorable members. I'm going to take you through the next set of slides speaking about infrastructure allocations. So we know that when the minister tabled the budget in February, he tabled the budget amounting to 800 billion for infrastructure. And infrastructure is one of the key levers to stimulate economic growth. So essentially, if the assumption is that if you put more money into infrastructure allocation, you are more likely to stimulate economic activity because companies are buying materials to build infrastructure. But there is a growing concern that the fiscal multipliers are becoming increasingly negative. In essence, it means that the responsiveness of growth to infrastructure spending is not necessarily positive. So the question that we should be asking ourselves is, why is it that public spending infrastructure is not necessarily realizing growth benefits? And that's one of the key issues that, in our view, in the parliament in exercising its oversight role is a question that needs to be asked to some of the leading departments implementing infrastructure. So the table here just indicate the allocations over in comparison to the current year medium-term expenditure framework relative to the 2017 medium-term expenditure framework. Despite the fact that there's been 800 billion allocation for infrastructure over the next medium-term expenditure framework, we still find that it doesn't really compare well with the allocation that was made in the MTEP allocation made in 2017. And that is understandable because that is a result of the cuts which were implemented on most of the infrastructure conditional grants for provinces and municipalities. Obviously, going forward, as my colleague Sasha has indicated, the Parliament would really should receive some reports from some of the key infrastructure implementing departments on how these cuts are going to affect projects which are already underway, or maybe even projects that would have to be delayed or stopped as a result of the cuts going forward. But also importantly is how are those the stopping of or delaying of those projects ultimately going to affect economic recovery in the medium to the long term. Next slide. The next slide here, honorable members, is just to indicate the infrastructure allocation per vote. The main issue here to highlight, suppose, is that transport receives quite a chunk of the allocations, but when you really look into the details of those allocations, transportation, you actually find that quite a chunk of the allocations goes to the provincial roads maintenance grant, but also some of it goes to PRASA allocation. And what you're also finding is that quite a significant portion of those allocations to the likes of PRASA and as well as the likes of PRASA actually finance operations. So increasingly what we're seeing is the resources that are allocated for infrastructure are moving away from the actual implementation of infrastructure into financing the operations of some of the SOCs. Another important factor that we really want to highlight is if you look at the allocation that goes to the education infrastructure, for instance, it's mainly driven by the school backlogs infrastructure grant as well as the education infrastructure grant. When the school backlogs infrastructure grant was introduced around 2011, there was a target of about 3-4 years to eliminate infrastructure backlogs in the Eastern Cape. But we're sitting here 8 years down the line with those backlogs not having been achieved. And that is a result of the poor spending that these infrastructure grants have been experiencing over the years. And we continue to see this poor spending or even poor quality of spending of the infrastructure that is delivered through these infrastructure allocations. Of course, going forward is that the oversight over the conditional grants should not only focus on the percentage expenditure of the conditional grant, but actually on the actual infrastructure that is being delivered through this infrastructure conditional grant. So essentially, Parliament or even through maybe the PPO should be receiving some reports on some of the engineering reports delivered, prepared after completion of some of these conditional grants. The next slide, which is my last slide here, members speak about the maintenance allocation for infrastructure. Again, what we see here is that increasingly the growth rate for infrastructure allocation is actually declining over time, and it's even becoming worse for this for the 2020-21 MTF allocation. We see that the growth allocation decreases by to 1.4% relative to 6.3% in 2019. Again, this is a huge risk to the infrastructure that has been built, because it means that the rate of infrastructure degradation increases faster as a result of poor maintenance or limited allocation for infrastructure maintenance. So of course, going forward from the Commission's view is that government must also Parliament must also receive the reports from some of these key infrastructure implementing departments and agencies as to how much they're allocating for infrastructure maintenance and the actual expenditure on infrastructure maintenance. That will be all from my side, Chair. Let me hand over back to my colleague Sasha too. I think it's time. Thanks. Sorry.
Thank you, Eddie. Good morning, Chairperson, and good morning, honorable members. I'm going to take you through 3 slides that pertains to SOE's issues, and then the last 2 slides will speak to the Special Appropriation Bill. So starting off with the SOE's expenditure trends, the graph at the top of the slides shows expenditure average growth rates for the period during 2017-18 to 2020-21, as well as 2021 to 23-24. So the blue graph, they represent the average growth rate that is covering the period between 2017-18 and 2020-21. And then the orange one represents the average growth rate for the period covering 2020-21 to 23-24. There are 2 main points that we just want to make with regards to the expenditure trends of SOEs. The first one being that if you take the program, the Business Enhancement, Transformation and Industrialization Program, you see that there has been a decrease by 90.4% between 2021, 22 and 23, 24. And this is purely a reflection of the withdrawal of the once-off substantial payment for financial assets in the 2 outer years. Those are the allocations for ESCOM that amounted to 31.7 billion, and then also to SAA, which amounted to 4.3 billion. So it represents the significance of the financial support to these SOEs from the fiscus. The other thing that we note is that the program accounts for 99% of the total expenditure for the department, which means that it's substantial. It almost takes the entire expenditure for the department. And the most important point that we want to alert the members on is that the continuing financial support for these ailing SOEs without any guidance framework to it poses risks to the fiscus. We'll discuss the risk in the later slide. The second point that we want to make is that the expenditure for the state-owned companies governance assurance performance program increases at an average annual rate of 14.9 between 2021 and 22 and 2023 and 24 to cater for the establishment of a secretariat for the Presidential State-Owned Enterprises Council. Now, this council has been tasked with repositioning and restructuring the SOEs, and also, most importantly, the development of a government shareholder management bill, which will will strengthen the governance of SOEs. And the view of the Commission is that this is a very positive step to the right direction because it seeks to address in a very meaningful way the challenges that are affecting most of these SOEs. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yes. Now, on this slide, we're looking at the financial support to SOEs. The first point that we want to make is that the weak financial position of most of these SOEs are resulting in liquidity shortfalls that then consequently results in government having to bail them out. So by way of demonstration, the 31.7 billion allocated to Eskom for 2021-22 is additional to the 56 billion that was allocated to Eskom for 2021-22 for restructuring the entity. And if you come to the SAA, we see that 16.4 billion was allocated to SSA over the 2020 MTF period to settle state guaranteed debt and associated interest costs. We've gone on to show the breakdown over that period. Also, if you look at Denel used an allocation of 1.8 billion in 2019-20 to restart operations and repay some of their creditors, and also to settle interest and bridging loans. Also, an additional funding of 576 million was allocated for 2021 to settle interest and repay government guaranteed debt. If we look at the land bank, 3 billion was allocated to the bank, and an additional 7 billion was identified as additional funding required to support the restructuring of the bank. Sorry. So if you look at these amounts, you see that there is a massive support for the SOE, and in the view of the Commission, this is undermining the fiscal consolidation exercise and also increasing the debt burden. Eskom in particular continues to be a significant drain to the fiscus, and according to their latest financial annual reports, they say that Eskom will require government financial support amounting to 1 billion per week in 2021, and so that's a massive financial support to Eskom, and we're saying this is really having an impact on the fiscus. Next slide. So, looking specifically now to the risks that SOEs are presenting to the fiscus, we make four main points on this slide. So the first one is that government exposure to these SOEs is really high, and it amounts to a significant risk to debt sustainability and public finances. And in the view of the Commission, what is required is a framework for supporting these SOEs that is conditional on them improving their governance situation and meeting clear quantitative, operational, and financial performance goals. The second point that we're making is that contingent liabilities, as they relate to these SOEs, are also very high, and they translate into a credit rating downgrade risk for South Africa because of the large size and the high probability of migrating of their balance sheet migrating into government's balance sheet. So this, in the Commission's view, require a framework for quantifying and limiting risk in respect to SOE's contingent liabilities. The third point is that the SOE's governance failures manifesting in inefficiency, corruption, and financial mismanagement really calls for legislative and governance reforms for these SOEs that will be based on centralized oversight, in particular with regards to procedures for the appointment of SOE board members, but also most importantly the performance management framework and procurement regulations for these SOEs. The last point relates to the fact that most of these enterprises are experiencing severe and financial operational challenges resulting from corruption and weak accountability. These also require an acceleration of the restructuring processes of these SOEs, in particular ESCOM. And we're saying that the restructuring must be based on a thorough appraisal of existing expenditure and the mandates and policies that they are based on, to ensure that there is efficiency, effectiveness, and profitability when it comes to these SOEs. We're now going to look at this, the last two slides that are on the 2021 Special Appropriation Bill. So, as members will be aware, the aim of the Special Appropriation Bill is to appropriate additional amounts that affect adjustment to specific votes. So, starting off with the 21 Special Appropriation Bill contains additions to health and social development votes, and also an adjustment to the public enterprises vote. So, starting off with health, we note that an amount of 1.25 billion was appropriated in terms of Section 16.1 of the PFMA to the National Department of Health, mainly to procure vaccines, COVID-19 vaccines, and implement research. So 1.1 billion is committed through the communicable and non-communicable disease management, and then the 150 million to the health system governance and human resources. And the Commission is of the view that given the pressing need to contain COVID-19 spread of infection, the Commission is in agreement of this special appropriation. When it comes to social development, we see that 2.83 billion is allocated to the social development vote, mainly to fund the extension of the special COVID-19 social relief of distress grant. And again, the Commission is in agreement of this allocation, given the pressing need to provide relief to those that have been severely affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, lastly, looking at the public enterprise vote, we note that SSA has been in business rescue for a period covering 16 months, and this process has likely excluded the subsidiaries to SSA, including Mango, the SSA Technical, which is the aircraft maintenance wing, and the HFs, which is the in-flight catering aspect of SSA, and also SAA Cargo, which is air freight. So the Special Appropriation Bill provides additions to mainly to cater for funding that will go to these SAA subsidiaries through the SAA business rescue process. So in terms of the allocation, 2.7 billion goes to the SAA SOE company, and then 1.6 billion goes to the SAA technical company. 800 million goes to Mango, whereas 280 million goes to the HF's company aspect of SAA. So the point that we are making is that South Africa's airline industry, just like in alignment with the global airline industry, has been severely affected by COVID-19 and the subsequent introduction of strict government measures that were aimed at curbing the spread of the virus. So we're saying, whereas the restrictions have been relaxed now, but the demand for travel remains flat because, amongst other factors, of the slow rollout of vaccine and the shift to working home, and also via the video conferencing. And this is expected to affect the recovery of the industry, affecting all players, not just here in South Africa, but globally, including SAA, which was already struggling before COVID-19 pandemic. And the last point we're making is that with regards to Mango, we've seen that they have been facing a cash flow crisis that at some point resulted in the temporal suspension of operations. So with this amount that they are going to receive, it will provide relief and ensure that there is no collapse of Mango Airlines. I will hand over to my colleague Sasha to conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, Tando. Chair, in these last two slides, we just provide some concluding remarks that emphasize the key points or messages that we think are important here. As Sianda indicated at the beginning, we do see some signs of recovery in terms of growth, but we are still very far from pre-COVID growth rates, so still a long way to go. And then a point that we raised when we presented to the Committee on the Division of Revenue Bill a few months ago, we want to re-emphasize that apart from the constrained economic situation that we find ourselves in, there are also the continuing or long-standing concerns around financial and performance-related dysfunctionalities, which give rise to fiscal leakages, wastage, and inefficiencies. And we think given the type of adjustments to budgets that we're seeing now, the very constrained economic and fiscal environment we find ourselves in, much more must be done to find areas where efficiencies can be reaped. And we give a number of suggestions there on how we think it can be done. These range from the need for much more decisive and strong political will to address the root causes of these fiscal leakages, as well as other strategies such as implementing fiscal consolidation in a more focused manner. So cutting areas where spending performance is poor and where performance is questionable. There are also opportunities around investment in technology that we think should be leveraged. Then the supply chain management function is often where much irregularities occur. So aspects like contract mismanagement and procurement irregularities must be rooted out. But we think what is key is that where there is wrongdoing, there must be greater certainty that repercussions will follow. So consequence management and accountability mechanisms must be effective. The FFC also advises that as part of the plan to promote growth, the budget should be more specific in supporting local demand and localized product procurement. This was a point we raised when we presented to the Committee on the Division of Revenue Bill. When it comes to the adjustments to votes of the Appropriation Bill for 2021-22, we reiterate that recommendation again that we made on the Division of Revenue Bill, that Parliament must receive regular reporting on the implications of budget cuts, especially when considering Section 32 reports. Departments must indicate how these cuts are going to be absorbed and which aspects of delivery will be affected. Spending on infrastructure, as Eddie indicated, is said to be one of the key levers for stimulating growth. One of the key issues there is that while investment in new infrastructure is important, equally important is caring for existing assets. And in this regard, the figures show that the percentage of funds going to maintenance is on the decrease when compared to previous years. And this has implications for the lifespan of our infrastructure, its performance, and future costs. Finally, with respect to SOEs, we reiterate that the support being provided undermines our fiscal consolidation program, as well as contributing to the debt burden. And the concern is that the impact of the pandemic is likely to worsen the financial position of these SOEs, as Tando mentioned in his presentation, and this will lead to and even the need for even greater support for them. Chair, I think I will leave it there. That brings us to the end of the slide presentation. If I may hand over to Commissioner Rockman in case she has final comments to make. Thank you.
Commissioner Rockman, you are either
Yes.
muted or you didn't hear us. Please wait for you.
Thank you, Chairperson. I think that concludes the presentation. Let me just acknowledge that Professor Trevor Fowler and Professor Aubrey Mukadi is also with us in the meeting. They are also commissioners at the FFC. I don't know if they want to add at this stage or will they come in when we are discussing or responding to questions. Thank you very much, Chair.
Commissioners, do you want to come in?
Chair, I think it's better to wait for the questions that would come and then we can comment later.
Thank you so much.
Same with me.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. You're welcome. Honorable members, thank you very much for the presentation from FFC. Honorable members, you know how we do it. Let's interact with the presentation by FFC. I'm going to be a little bit liberal. I don't want to limit you, but be conscious of the time. Let's hear. Please shout at me. Who wants to have a go?
Matafa.
Honorable Matafa.
Sarupen.
Honorable Sarupen. Hi, Honorable Sarupen. How are you?
I'm good, and yourself, Chair?
Fine, thank you. After Honorable Sarupen. Honorable members. Honorable members, make sure you unmute. Who else is there? Or who else would like to have a bite? Honorable members are there? Okay. While you're still thinking, I will then allow Honorable Matafa to have a go.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, Chair. Good morning to Commissioner Rockman and the team. Let me start first by thanking the FFC for a sterling presentation they have made. It's assisting in us having a meaningful discussion as far as the state of our fiscus is concerned. Chairperson, maybe let me start with the point that was almost made at the end, but it's also in the presentation of a lack of consequence management in trying to address the scourge of leakages. And maybe before I proceed, I apologize for having my video off. My network is unstable. And at your pleasure, Chair, I request to keep it this way. Chair, there is tremendous progress as far as recoveries in civil claims made by state-owned entities on areas where there is proof that there was some mismanagement and fraudulent activities that took place. We see on a daily basis that former executives of various state-owned entities appear in court and attachment orders are made. Whilst we welcome that, we also need to continue lamenting the fact that it is also not prudent while you recover past losses, but continuing to experience current losses. Because if you look across the board, you will still see, Chair, that irregular and wasteful expenditure still persist. And in actual fact, it is increasing. And if we continue at this rate of only recovering after the fact without preventative measures, one would still be motivated to try their luck so that maybe by the time that we recover these funds, they are diversified, maybe have increased their investments, and the loss or what we recover is not going to affect or impact their lives negatively. So I agree fully with the view that consequence management need to be strengthened, particularly when you listen to the fact that ESCOM is stating that it might require, if I got the figure correctly, R1 billion per week to remain afloat going forward. I see this, Chair, as a risk to the economy of the country, because in the past few ratings that we received from rating agencies, most rating agencies will cite unstable or unreliable energy supply as a risk or as a factor that lead to them having the kind of rating opinion on the country. So I think it's very important that when we deal with these leakages, particularly as far as ESCOM is concerned, we might be able to mitigate the amount that might be required in future to keep ESCOM afloat. Chair, the second point is on the slippages as far as the direct and indirect tax collections are concerned, and which actually leads to economic slowdown. Now, my question is on the efficiency of the mechanisms to support economic recovery and reconstruction plan. Do we see the rate cut on corporate tax as one of those mechanisms? Will it be efficient? And what would the view of FFC be if maybe National Treasury would have maybe opted for a targeted approach aimed specifically at small, medium, and macro enterprises, or specific sectors that are suffering from the unrelenting job losses? Chair, whilst I'm still on the SMMEs, I want to take issue with the 200 billion credit guarantee scheme. Whilst we welcome the 3 months extension that is reflected.
Tournament is the second most important in world football. First, the Senior World Cup.
Newsroom, can you please mute?
Yeah, thank you for that, Chair.
To play in the Tokyo Olympics. Our under-23 team is going to play against in the Olympics.
Please mute. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Continue, Matafa.
Thank you. Chair, on the SMMEs, I support the view that the credit guarantee scheme be extended. However, it is my view also, and a view of many entrepreneurs who come through our constituency offices, that this scheme was a dismal failure. A failure in a sense that those that are hardest hit by the effects of the pandemic did not even have access to this particular guaranteed scheme. So I have maybe two questions, Chair, around the guaranteed scheme. The first one is if whether reliance on commercial banks to assist government in expediting its mandate is prudent. The second point, it's maybe on the issue of the Reserve Bank. Could maybe they have intervened more aggressively, maybe to lower the cost of debt for business and drive economic growth? Because as I state, Chair, the many people that I am referring to in the main happen to be Black entrepreneurs, emerging businesses, and businesses owned by the youth. We have it on record that the Minister of Small Business Development also lamented the fact that there was underspending on the fund, but also it only assisted those that would have gotten assistance at a normal application at the commercial bank. So basically, at that point,
and I know
government was not necessarily implemented by reliance on the
still have 2-3 more months.
Disbursement.
Newsroom, what's the problem? Please mute. Please mute. Newsroom Africa, please mute.
Thank you, Chair. I'm proceeding.
Now, Italy's Yannick Sinner beat Hugo Humbert of France at the Italian Open yesterday, setting up.
Darren, Chairperson, can you please try and contact newsroom? I've been trying to ask them to mute. They keep on interfering with the meeting.
Yes, Chair. I have. Unfortunately, I won't be able to contact them directly, but I have placed them in a waiting room, so that
Can you mute them on your side?
I've been muting them, but they keep on interfering, so I placed them in a waiting room, Chair.
Okay, until they call you, and then you tell them that you are getting this disturbance.
Yes,
Thank
Chair.
you.
Thank you, Darren, and thank you, Chairperson. The other point, Chair, is just maybe to solicit a view from the FFC in terms of what is their view as far as the policy intervention and particularly structural reforms that may be required in order to create a demand and return the economy to pre-COVID output levels. And whilst on the economic recovery, Chair, the last reporting by the World Bank and the United Nations showed that immediately we came out of the hard lockdown, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange recovered much better than the economy of the country, which shrank by a further 7%. Now, that being noted, Chair, I'm interested to know what is the current level of private sector investment, particularly as it pertains to infrastructure, one of the key drivers that have been identified by the President. And we also agree in the committee that there are drivers to economic turnaround. And if they have that particular picture, what in their opinion is the level when you compare South Africa's exposure by private sector in the infrastructure market compared to other developing countries? The last one, Chair, is what the FFC maintains as evidence of real growth in local government equitable share. We however note that there is a significant reduction in conditional grants to the sphere of government. What is the likely impact of these reductions, particularly as it pertains to the notion of real growth in local government equitable share? For now, Chair, let me pause there. I thank you for the opportunity to participate in this discussion. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Sarupen.
Thank you very much, Chair. Chair, I always enjoy getting presentations on the FFC because I think they cut through to the heart of the matters all the time, and I think they've done so again. I have two questions. First is around the SOE bailouts, and there was a slide that showed that in the medium term and with the budget over the next couple of years, we will not be seeing as aggressive spending on SOEs as we have in the preceding 3 financial years. Does the FFC believe that that is actually the case when one looks at the financial state of the SOEs and the annual demand from SOEs for bailouts and additional funding? And does the FFC think that this is the largest risk to states' finances, and whether this consequently is pushing us closer and closer to a fiscal cliff? The reality is that, and then the point was made, for example, with our state-owned airlines and their various subsidiaries, that there's going to continue to be subdued demand, and even restarting that is not necessarily an efficient spend when you have entire towns without water because their municipal water infrastructure has collapsed. And there's far more of an economic multiplier effect in getting the water situation sorted in those towns than there would be in getting airlines flying again in this environment. So I'd like to, do they actually think that that is the case, or that the state will be able to meet its projections of not having to put further money into recapitalizing or bailing out state-owned enterprises? Or is this just a plan that is not likely to meet with fruition when it's at the actual state of the state-owned enterprises? The second question I have, Chair, is, and it comes down to this, with regards to local government allocations and expenditures and plans, as well as conditional grants and the reductions there too that Honourable Matafa made reference to. Does the FFC believe that the allocations made to local government over the last several years from national have been done so efficiently? Should we be circumscribing even more specifically what local government should be spending its allocations on? Or do they think that the current situation and the current way money is allocated to local governments is allocatively efficient? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Sarupen. Let me Oral members, anybody coming in? Okay, let me take the next set of questions. Thank you again, FFC, for the presentation and the issues that we have raised for our consideration. My first one would be, I would like you to comment on the capacity to spend by the economic departments. You are making a point that there is the allocations to those economic departments are not increasing. So I'm just saying, what is your observation as far as their capacity to spend budget allocations? And if you could make the same comment about the peace and security departments, what has been the historical expenditure pattern coming from those departments? You are saying, perhaps to deal with the challenges that we are having, we should be cutting on some programs which are ineffective and duplicate. If you don't mind, can you please share with us from your own opinion, we won't hold you onto it, which are those programs which you don't think from your point of view, a scientific point of view, which are those programs which you would consider to be duplicates and ineffective? A worrying thing is that, let me say that in the MTF, we're allocating about 800 billion rand to infrastructure. And it's based on the assumption, the hypothesis that we are having is that we are going to get a better multiplier effects in terms of growth, and I'm sure in terms of employment creation and so on and so forth, and even in terms of revenues. But we are saying that we are seeing negative multiplier effect in infrastructure. Is that normal? That's one. But two, what will you attribute that to? Because we have identified infrastructure as a way out of the economic stagnation that we're having. So what do you think the reasons are? But related to that, which areas of spend have shown positive multiplier effects, if any? For instance, if you look at your aggregate demand equation, have you been able to see, for instance, the special grants, the 350 rand, are you able to say how they impacted, for instance, on economic growth, or what were the positive multiplier effects, any, coming from those expenditures? Can you please, again, I'm still on infrastructure. It is worrying for this committee that year in, year out, we allocate money for infrastructure spend, but come the end of the year, you find that infrastructure allocations have not been spent. The impact on service delivery is there for everybody to see. But again, you have alluded to that the impact on the general economy, again, it's negative. But as far as they are concerned, what do you think the bottlenecks are in terms of infrastructure spend? What should be done to try and correct that? What would you advise the departments and advise this committee and other committees of parliament to do? You also are raising, you spoke about PRASA, and you are saying one of the things that we are observing is that capital expenditure end up being used for current expenditure. Do you have an idea what percentage of that infrastructure spend goes to current expenditure, and what would you attribute that to? SOEs, we do get reports coming from the Office of the Chief Procurement talking about deviations. One worrying trend is that there are a lot of deviations that get presented to us. If my memory serves me well, for instance, in the last presentation we got was that ESCOM got deviations of 60 billion rand. Would you comment on that and factoring in what you spoke about in terms of correcting things, the procurement regulation? One thing which I always find missing in the presentations that we get, but now particularly let me talk to the Commission, is the impact of the expenditure and the budgets that we that we appropriate as far as economic transformation is concerned. For instance, our consolidated expenditure this year, it's over 2 trillion rand. Do you think that we are making any dent as far as economic transformation is concerned to make sure that the people who are previously disadvantaged also become economic participants? Talking about Black people, in particular Africans. We're talking about women, we're talking about people living with disabilities, rural areas, and so on and so forth. I just want to say to the commissioners, it's one area which is very important for this committee, that we have said that the budget that we appropriate and allocate to departments should also serve the purpose of transforming the economy of this country. Related to that, we also want to try and increase localization. What do you think the response of the departments and SOEs have been, and what could be done differently to try and ensure that we localized? Remember that every rand that we spend on importation, it's equal to, it impacts negatively to economic growth, but again, it also equals to exporting jobs, which are very much needed in our economy. What do you think that should be done differently to ensure that this question of localization do take place, so that we deal with the economy, to kickstart our economy, and also to ensure that we also increase job opportunities for young people of our country? Yeah, I think those would be my points. And Oral Peters, do you want to come in?
Thank you very much, Chairperson. And I want to start by apologizing to you and to the meeting for the coming in after you, Chairperson. It was not intended. But I also want to take this opportunity to thank the FFC for their presentation. Although I was in and out because of network challenges, Chairperson, my questions are, what is needed, FFC, for the South African economy to return to the pre-COVID times? And I just want to indicate, Chairperson, that in the last few weeks, I've been in and out of the hospitals, in particular the public hospitals, and I found the adherence to COVID protocols. For me, it seems they have helped to improve the conditions at public hospitals, and the need for implementation of NHI is truly urgent, because for me, it tells me that if the COVID protocols in the health sector could allow for if you go into the basic things like your passages, your toilets, and other areas of the hospital, they are spotlessly clean. And I think it is important that that be enhanced even post-COVID, if it is going to be a time like that. And also the social distancing and all those other things contribute to a clean air environment in the hospitals. And I think that for me says we could utilize the lessons from implementation in the health sector of the COVID protocols to actually accelerate the implementation of the NHI. And I also want to know from the FFC, do they think that the South African Reserve Bank need to intervene to lower cost of debt for businesses and to drive the economy, especially in view of the dismal failure, Chairperson, of the 200 billion credit guarantee scheme? We have been informed that the businesses that benefited were predominantly white-owned businesses, and we believe that this loan guarantee scheme is supposed to have benefited even the small businesses that actually were hard hit by the lockdown regulations. But also, is the FFC believing that the South African Reserve Bank needs to also intervene in dealing with the onerous requirements by banks for small businesses and private individuals? Because I believe then banks hamstrung the right to property ownership. And many people are going to, because of loss of jobs and the hard-hitting economy, lose their ownership of the only asset that they have, which is their homes and all those. And I think it is important that we hear from FFC whether they believe that the South African Reserve Bank is doing good or needs to do more. And also, Chairperson, how far is the South African government from achieving the NDP targets of 2030 of investing 30% of the GDP in infrastructure? We know infrastructure spend is a major job creator, and it can enable the reduction of poverty and inequality. So I think it is important that we hear from the FFC whether they believe that we are far or we're moving nearer. Lastly, Chairperson, and you would know that this is something that the presenters to our committees always raise, especially those who are dealing with pensioners and grant beneficiaries. The issue of the BIG versus the SRD, it's in my view important for me to know, is it time that the South African government consider a mandate for the Tax Commission to search for solutions to expand on the SRD, the social relief of distress, or to implement the BIG? Is FFC believing that we are now closer to that time where we need to implement as a country the BIG? Thank you very much, Chairperson, and I'm sorry lastly for coming in after you. Apologies.
Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Peters. No problem. Any other honorable member who would like to come in? But to make the work of FFC a little bit harder, I just wanted to check that one thing which has been raised year in, year out again is the question of BEPS. BEPS and illicit financial flows. And we are told that we are losing billions and billions of rands through these schemes, and are very complicated schemes sometimes. Do you think that we are doing enough as a country to deal with these challenges? If you can, please advise perhaps what do you think this committee would have to do, what Parliament needs to do, any specific laws that perhaps we may need to promulgate, yeah, to try and deal with these twin evils of BEPS and illicit financial flows. Thank you. I think that those will be our questions. Ms. Rockman and the commissioners were all yours.
Thank you, Chairperson. I think I'm going to ask the presenters to respond first, to take a first bite at the responses. Sasha, Sianda, Eddie, and Tandu. and then Commissioner Fowler, Commissioner Mukadi, and myself will then add. Obviously, some of the more technical questions we may not deal with in detail now, but we could then make a further submission to the committee to provide other information. Sasha, you can start.
Thanks, Commissioner Rockman. I think there were many questions posed on infrastructure. So maybe I'll just start by touching on that. And I think it was the chair that asked, what can we do to address some of the bottlenecks? And the first issue that we focus on when we think about infrastructure, and that we've raised particularly with the Portfolio Committee on Basic Education, who experience very low levels of spending on infrastructure grants, is the way in which infrastructure projects are rolled out. We see often the departments tend to separate the planning and budgeting phases of infrastructure projects from the implementation of them. So you have the department doing the planning and budgeting, and then you have heavy reliance on implementing agents responsible for rollout on the ground. So there's a lot of distance between those that are accountable for spending, the department, and those implementing or rolling out the project on the ground. And oftentimes this leads to implementing agents that are not incentivized to properly manage these projects. And the result is we see projects that are over budget and not in line with timelines for infrastructure development. So one of the key things that we need to do is to strengthen oversight. So just because the department is as an implementing agent doesn't mean that they sit back and relax, but we actually need oversight to be much stronger, so that they are on the minute opportunities for fiscal misappropriation arise, the department is there jumping in. So that is the first point. We also think that there may be a bit of a disconnect between relying on implementing agents, and on the other hand, departments are also now building these infrastructure delivery management systems, or IDMS sections within departments, and recruiting people like quantity surveyors and that type of thing. So if we are spending this money and employing those types of skills, we would expect over time also that we have a little bit less reliance on consultants. But really the key thing when it comes to oversight is, when it comes to infrastructure, is to strengthen that oversight role of government departments. There was also a question by Honorable Sarupen about the real growth, and I think Honorable Matafa, the real growth in the equitable share relative to cuts in conditional grants, and what are the implications. So the local government equitable share funds the operational costs associated with delivery of basic services, especially to your indigent households, whereas conditional grants fund largely your infrastructure development. So with the number of conditional grants that we see, the reductions in them, we're likely to see also then slower development of infrastructure within that sphere, or that projects take longer to be, infrastructure projects take longer to be wrapped up. There was a question on capacity to spend. So broadly, when we look at, say, some of the police constitutional development, those votes, we see that spending performance, particularly underspending, it's been relatively low over the past few years. Similarly, with respect to the justice vote. With economic services related programs, we also don't see alarming underspending rates there. Then on the duplicated areas of duplicated interventions. We think there is opportunity to sort of streamline projects and activities. For example, there are a number of conditional grant programs with similar objectives. One example is for the in the basic education sector, the education infrastructure grant, and say the school's infrastructure backlog grant. We think there's some, there are areas of overlap that could be rooted out if these two were to be merged. Some of these programs and activities that have similar objectives occur in the same sector. So say, for example, the EIG and the SIBG, it's both in the basic education sector, whereas in other instances, it may require better cross-departmental interaction to determine where exactly there is this duplication and how departments can work together to minimize it. I'm not sure if the other members of the team would like to come in. Sianda, Tanda, or Eddie?
Okay, thanks, Sasha. I think on the on the question around private sector investment in infrastructure, I think we make the point that South Africa's economic growth has been constrained by low levels of investment in infrastructure that is compared to other developing economies. And of course, this is also captured. The extent of infrastructure spending in the economy is reflected in the gross fixed capital formation as a percentage of GDP. So the measure that we're showing there captures how much money as a proportion of total economic activity is being invested in capital goods such as equipment, tools, transport, and infrastructure. And several studies, as the question was, maybe we might have to investigate this further, but several studies consider an acceptable norm
Sianda? Sianda?
Yes, Chairperson?
I'm having a problem with your picture. You must see who's talking to us. There you go.
Oh, okay, apologies, Chairperson. Apologies for that. As I was saying, that several studies consider an acceptable norm of gross fixed capital formation as a percentage of GDP to be in the region of 30% to 35%, especially for a developing country. But as South Africa, so when you look at the World Bank data, South Africa, ours is still at around 18% of GDP. But as I was saying, that we would have to further investigate this so that we give much more detail in terms of private sector, the role that is being played by private sector in infrastructure. And then when it comes to the question of the Reserve Bank intervening to boost economic growth, I think broadly speaking, the use of monetary tools to boost economic activity and growth is acceptable. And again, here, perhaps we might have to further investigate the extent and the approach through which this can be done, and also looking maybe at the fiscal and monetary interdependence and how this is then transmitted into the economy and how that can boost economic growth. So some of the questions that were asked are questions that would have to go back and look at them so that we give a much more definitive and firm response than we are doing currently. I think Commissioner Rockman has already alluded to that some of the technical questions will have to go and look at them and assess the role that was played by the South African Reserve Bank in intervening, whether they should do much more intervention and how this can be done. Thank you. Those are the questions that I was addressing. Tando, maybe.
Thank you, Chairperson, for the opportunity to speak on some of these issues. With regards to the SOEs, there was a question on whether we believe that there will be a reduction in terms of financial support to SOEs in the outer years of the MTF period, as we alluded to that. The thing that we want to say is that, and it's a point that we make in the presentation, that because of the impact of COVID-19 on some of these SOEs, we anticipate that because of that, they may come for more financial support from government, because some of them have been negatively affected by the COVID-19 situation. And the fact that some of them, even before COVID-19 situation, they were in a very bad shape when it comes to their finances, resulting from some governance issues and the like. So that too might contribute in them coming to the fiscus for more financial support. So it's possible that there will be more bailouts that will be required for some of them. But what is important to us is the fact that there seems to be a clear case for tackling the challenges of SOEs in a holistic manner, which is why then we think it is to the government shareholder management bill when it comes to them to ensure that issues like the procurement regulations are tightened, so that the current weaknesses that we experience with these SOEs do not continue going forward. So that speaks to the issue that was raised by the chairperson with regards to deviations, the fact that when it comes to deviation, Eskom's deviation amounted to 60 billion, which is a massive amount. But we think that the role of Parliament will be key in ensuring through that the government shareholder management bill that everything is done to tighten the procurement regulations and other regulations that may contribute to these weaknesses in governance in SOEs that are resulting in them experiencing financial trouble. So that will be our take in as far as the SOEs are concerned. I will hand over to maybe Eddie if he has anything to add. Thank you.
Thanks, Chairperson. Just some answers on few questions on the issue about the capacity of the economic departments to spend. So when you look at the composition of the budget of these departments, you actually find that 80% of the allocation actually constitute transfers to some of the reporting agencies. And when you actually go and look further what the allocations do in those the agencies, you actually find that quite a significant portion, about 30%, would go to compensation of employees, and the rest would generally go to grants to some of the beneficiaries. So there is that capacity to spend, but increasingly you're finding that the allocations which goes to these economic departments eventually end up with the spending agencies. And they usually, when this budget analysis is done, we tend to overlook some of these transfers to the agencies reporting to the departments, because that's where actually quite a lot of money sit in. And you actually see this especially during towards the end of the financial year, when there is under expenditure within these departments, they then transfer the funding to the agencies. So that's, I suppose, that's where Parliament would want to strengthen oversight, so that we also look at what exactly happens within some of these agencies. Now, the issue of negative multiplier, especially on infrastructure, there is a study that was done by the Reserve Bank actually indicating these negative multipliers. And essentially, this boils down to the infrastructure delivery management processes that my colleague Sasha has already spoken to. What we have done, there was a study that the Commission did in 2017, 2018, I think, as part of the submissions to the Division of Revenue. We looked at this infrastructure management delivery processes and the weaknesses thereof in respect of local government. So what you find is that the biggest bottlenecks is the huge cost overruns associated with infrastructure projects. There's also completion delays as well as the poor workmanship. So essentially what happens is that sometimes because of the limited budget allocation to infrastructure projects, it takes a long time for the municipality or even a department to complete a particular project. By the time a project is completed, it already needs huge maintenance or refurbishment. And that, as a result, that obviously places a drag on as to the extent to which the infrastructure can have a positive effect on economic growth, especially if this happens on a large scale. So it's not just limited to one municipality, but it happens across the entire country. So all of these things combined actually puts a drag on economic growth. And one example of this is the allocations that are given to ESCOM. Since the ESCOM, infrastructure build program started, there has been huge cost overruns, but the projects have not been completed, and yet the money has been spent. As a result, that is exactly the reason why we don't see this positive infrastructure spending growth effect, because of these inefficiencies in spending. So if we put a stop to those inefficiencies, we are more likely to see. So which areas are we likely to see positive growth effects? There was, again, the FFC did some work around 2012, 13, I think somewhere there, which were looking at the impact of infrastructure spending on economic growth. And essentially the result was indicating there was that infrastructure spending on water, electricity, and as well as sanitation actually have got much more bigger growth effect than the other economic infrastructure. We can share that report with the committee. But essentially, there's always these assumptions that the economic infrastructure contributes much more to spending on economic infrastructure contributes quite significantly on economic growth. But the result that we actually found was that, in fact, spending on basic things like water, sanitation, actually have got much more growth effect than some of these big ticket items that we would like to spend on. And we're increasingly seeing this with some of the companies taking municipalities to court for being unable to provide reliable water supply and reliable sanitation supply, because that essentially kills the local economies. So as the chairperson also asked a question around the impact of total infrastructure on economic transformation. Okay, I forgot to mention that for this upcoming submission, there is a paper which actually look at the impact of infrastructure, leadership on infrastructure delivery. And as the commission, by the time when the commission present its result, would actually show the extent to which the infrastructure leadership, the leadership for infrastructure delivery actually affect the poor delivery of infrastructure, even the negative and the negative spillover effect on the economy. Now, the question on the impact of total infrastructure economic transformation, which is really a huge question, and this question, I suppose, that the Commission is always asking on many occasions. We are also thinking of looking at that in the next submission that the Commission will be doing. But again, this is quite a broader question, and it really depends on how we define economic transformation, because it depends on really what we define as economic transformation. But through some of the matrices that are published by Statistics SA actually indicates that there is gradual improvement in the number of people who have access to water, who have access to electricity. But again, the question there is around the reliability of these water services. So the fact that there are 95% of the population have access to water does not always mean that there is reliable water. There's water coming out from the taps all the time. So that's where I suppose the issue of transformation comes in, as to whether when infrastructure has been laid out the pipes have been laid out, does those pipes actually produces the services that are supposed to be going to the people? And the information from Statistics SA actually indicate that there is some concerns around the reliability of basic services delivery, despite the fact that we may have infrastructure to provide access to them. And then I think the last issue on the Reserve Bank, which I suppose my colleague Sianda has already spoken to, is around whether the Reserve Bank should intervene to lower the cost of borrowing, and whether they've done enough to really lower the cost of borrowing. And obviously related to this is the issue of the credit guarantee scheme, and as to why it has not worked. Particularly if you look at the reason why the credit scheme has not worked, has little to do with the Reserve Bank, but mostly with the compliance of the businesses which were applying for those funding. But also, I think as Honorable Tipo Peters has mentioned, there are these strict eligibility criteria applied by the private banks, or despite the fact that there was a guarantee from the. So they are. I think last time when we presented to this committee, we also mentioned that some of these eligibility criteria could have been eased in such a way that businesses which do not comply will be able to access the funding. But also importantly is to make sure that the business which have access to the credit guarantees are not necessarily those that are based in Gauteng only, so that the scheme is distributed more equitably across all the provinces. So that's one of the ways we think we could improve access to the credit guarantee scheme. Now, the issue of illicit financial flows, Chairperson, is quite a difficult one, but there are some studies which are actually beginning to indicate that government can actually use some of the procurement regulations to deal with illicit financial flows, especially excluding some of the companies which have got exposure risks to some of IFFS, illicit financial flows, as well as the tax haven. So when the government issue tenders, they've got to be an audit to see the companies that respond to some of the tenders and see whether, to the extent to which they may be exposed to counties which are likely to be tax havens or would have a high risk exposure to illicit financial flow. So that's one way of doing it. But I suppose we could always come back with more detail as to how we can deal with the illicit financial flow. Thank you very much. I think I would hand over to my commissioners to complete where we did not answer.
Thank you. Professor Fowler, I think there's a couple of questions on local government conditional grants and allocations. Can you take those questions?
Thank you, Honorable Buthelezi, Chair. Allow me to address a couple of issues. I think, first of all, around the local government. One of the recent studies, which I've been a part of, has shown that the support for local government is really done through COCTA, both national and provincial. However, if you look at the Constitution, it had really envisaged that support for local government should be the entire national government and entire provincial government, and there should be a coordination of that by a local government department. And so, with regard to the increase in the local government equitable share and the reduction in conditional grants, would mean that the amount of money that is being spent without conditions would be a larger percentage, which means that the local government would have a much greater say in spending the local government equitable share, because it has full say on that. Therefore, the reduction in conditional grants means that there would be less oversight in relation to that and fewer conditionality. And I think there is where the nub rises, that we all indicate that local government is weak, yet the support that is being provided is not adequate. What has been shown is that National Treasury provides a certain amount of support, particularly in relation to the expenditure of finances. However, when it comes to all of the other programs, it is not as well coordinated as that from National Treasury, which is really going beyond their mandate. There should be greater support from the other departments. Let me just go on to two issues. There were a question asked about the stability, about the SOEs, and I want to state that one of the key difficulties that has happened with the SOEs over the last few years, particularly since around the last 8 years or so, has been the whole scale changing of boards that has weakened the SOEs, and that good governance practice is that you should really change a third of the board at a time. Even though there may be big problems, it's better to ensure stability of those SOEs and change it in a more measured fashion, and ensuring that you then have a vision of the change that is required. That's one of the key things around the SOEs that has weakened the SOEs. The last point that I wanted to touch on around the infrastructure is that with regard to the infrastructure spend, we do have a infrastructure coordinator who's been appointed, a former mayor of Tshwane, Mr. Ramakopa, in the presidency. And I think there needs to be greater planning with regard to the infrastructure to ensure that the capacity to deliver the infrastructure is greater. If you look at the 800 billion that has been allocated, when I was in government, it was 800 billion, and that was many years ago in national government. So it means that we are lagging with the amount that we should be spending, notwithstanding the fact that we've had the COVID-19 pandemic, that the amount that should be spent is much greater than what is currently being allocated. And the last point around the big, there was a question around the basic income grant and relating to the COVID-19 grant of 350 rand. The grant has had a significant impact on addressing the impact of the pandemic on poverty in the country. Studies have shown that. And so the indications of a basic income grant is an area that we as the FFC would have to look at it a little more depth to see whether the basic income grant would have the same impact as the current 350 Rand grant has had on stemming the onslaught of poverty as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Perhaps I should leave it there, and if there are any other questions, Commissioner Rockman could call and follow up. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Mukadi, do you want to add?
Thank you very much, Chair. If I could just apologize because my network is a bit unstable, so I'm going to just remove the the video camera so that I can then respond to the question without interruption. With your permission, Chair.
Can continue, Commissioner.
I'd like to respond to the question raised by Honorable Mataf. I think it was one of the first questions that he raised in response to the issue that we had spoken about in our presentation about consequence management. And that was after we'd spoken about the fiscal leakages and weaknesses in financial management, issues of corruption and so forth. But what was key about what he had said was that regardless of the instruments that are used to curb that problem, year in and year out, the problem continue to persist. And we agree that that is the case because oftentimes we respond when there's a lot of media noise about issues of corruption, and we replace the persons implicated with others. But in no time, the very people that have been that are appointed to replace those that have been implicated tend to continue with the status quo and sometimes become much worse. So there's a need to try to re-look at what needs to be done. And what Honorable Matafa says is that maybe we need to be proactive in dealing with that so that we do not continue to react to the problem that continue to afflict our fiscus. In our response, we'd like to restate what had already been made in the presentation, and it is to deal with the issue, the need. In our recommendations, we talk about the need for legislative and governance reform, the need for procurement regulation, performance management framework, and so forth. But these could find a clear expression through the development of the government shareholder management bill. Perhaps when that is expedited and it's in operation, will then give rise to the presidential state-owned enterprise council insofar as the SOEs are concerned, and hopefully deal with the issues that Commissioner Fowler mentioned about appointments of boards and various other issues of governance. But having said that, that is our hope that that can contribute to stemming the tide of the weaknesses that we have mentioned. But all these depends on the mercy of mankind, because unless people who are entrusted with the implementation of these are themselves committed ethically and morally to uphold good values, then we would be back to talk about the very same problems 20 years from now. So we have a difficult situation in our country where the work ethic is very much affected by poor moral standards and poor ethical work environment. The president had recently spoken about professionalizing the public sector through the School of Governance. And again, that's something that is very hopeful, but depends on how people themselves respond to that. I think there's a need to put in a deep stick into the work ethics, the morals of our country, to assess exactly where we are with regard to these endemic problems that we've identified. And hopefully thereafter, accept that this is a critical situation that requires constant monitoring and evaluation and assessment and intervention as and when needed. In our presentation, we say that there's a need, all these can't be implemented properly unless there's political will. So having said all this, it comes back to a parliamentary portfolio committees that should hold the executive to account and continue to monitor and ask the relevant questions and engage proactively with regard to this. And hopefully we can then change the culture that is so endemic and very negative to good intentions that we do have. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Chairperson, Commissioner Kawe just lost connectivity. She is going to try to rejoin. I can just make one or two comments. On economic growth, I think we are still missing the opportunity inherent in agriculture. I think it's an unexplored or underexplored potential that we need to address much more aggressively, because we know the fiscal multipliers associated with agriculture. I think that it would stand us in good stead to pay a bit more attention to that. Then there was also a question about the NHI, or linked to the NHI, which I think, unfortunately, the NHI got shifted a bit to the background in the past year as a result of the COVID pandemic. But if you remember, in our submission last year, we dealt extensively with issues around the NHI. We pointed out particularly the current uncertainties that still needs to be clarified in the proposed legislative framework, and the impact for provincial health departments. And then also we did some work on proposed costing models for the NHI. Now, National Treasury did respond in the annexure to the Division of Revenue Bill. So the FFC must still engage with National Treasury's response and see how we take that matter further. But certainly the NHI becomes increasingly critical for implementation to ensure equal access for all to quality healthcare systems. So I think there will be, as we begin to move on from COVID-19 and the immediate crisis, the NHI issues must come back stronger onto our agenda. Thank you very much. Let me hand back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, commissioners and your team. Let me just check with the honorable members. Would you like to make follow-up on any of the questions that you have raised, or a new question? Honorable members? I take that as a no. Commissioner Rockman, let me just make a few follow-ups. There was a question which I asked, emanating from the negative, what you say, the negative multiply effects coming from infrastructure. Then said, in your aggregate demand curve, which ones have come out with a positive multiplier effects? That's one. And two, I decried the fact that there seems to be very little movement towards localization, which is very important. And I just wanted to check from your side, what is it that we are missing, or put it differently, what is it that can be done to ensure that, especially using the budget to enhance localization. I'm sure you are aware of an example where the budget has been used to enhance localization with PRASA, the Donatel manufacturing of of trains. It seems to be just a one project where government expenditure has been used to promote localization, which if you take it to its logical conclusion, may end up being used to promote export, especially with FCTA having been signed by heads of states of African governments. So I'm then saying from your side, what do you think can be done differently to try and enhance localization with obvious positive effects on the wider economy? Yeah, let me leave it at that. And can I hear a response, Commissioner Rockman and your team?
Thanks, Chairperson. I thought that Sianda was addressing the issue of the positive and negative multiplier effects of infrastructure. Maybe Sianda, can you just talk to that? Unless I missed that point. And then on localization, Chen, our director research, maybe you can also come in on that. Chen, I think you're on mute.
Apologies. Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Honourable Chair and members. So with regards to the localization of our production and manufacturing, and essentially trying to increase our productivity as an economy, I think what can be done, especially different, is we reiterate the terminology we use, which is the product value chain. And the focus word there is, of course, it's the product. So I think, and is in our last annual submission, we emphasized quite strongly in terms of identifying what are those products and the competitiveness or comparative advantages of those products, and extending to that is how does it relate to the upstream and downstream of that value chain. And you also remember, Honourable Chair members, that at the SONA of 2021, President did pronounce quite extensively in terms of that product value chain approach as it was adopted in our economic reconstruction and recovery plan. But I think what we can say as a commission, and also through our research, is that South Africa, compared to most other countries, we still haven't really quite sort of penetrated that notion and or adopted or actually implemented that notion of which product is the thing that it's proudly South Africa that is, that is, when one thinks about it, it's immediately they think of South Africa is the country that produces such goods. I think we need to move slightly and diversify our risk portfolio of production from sort of just mining, right, just gold or just platinum and so forth, and to look more into some of the other labor-intensive rather than capital-intensive industries, such as manufacturing, the textile industry that we lost out on in the past since democracy, and various other sort of niche products. I'm looking at or thinking about, for example, from Asian experience, is of course the semiconductors, or rather sort of cheap labor, but as a result created mass employment returns of manufacturing, especially in sort of not unsophisticated, I would say, still like in small household appliances and those kinds of things. We still haven't really identified something like that for South Africa. I think that is where we can certainly look at. And so to also compound that issue, it really has got to do with all the elements of discussions at this briefing. For instance, the spending and where to spend and how to spend. I think it's something that we need to look at. So I would like to coin the term, which is, Honorable Chair, you know very well, it's the marginal productivity of spend, and not just about the capacity to spend. So it's essentially what we're encouraging this committee to ask is always the question of what's, not just that what we get now anymore, it's actually more than that. It's about whether what we get is optimal in what we spend, rather than just out of our budgets do we spend 100%. That's kind of sort of a rudimentary, very simple look at the way of spend. I think very quickly running through also the other issues. I think okay, I think SOEs was about president's set, and I think with regards to also economic growth from the overall sort of monetary injection, I think it's important that I add that it's important to distinguish which rate we are talking about, right? There is the repo rates that sort of South African Reserve Bank has somewhat of a control of, but more importantly, I think it's important to look at the rate margin, because comparatively, and it's important for economic growth for South Africa, is that South Africa's banking sector seems to have been charging obscene fees for that rates margin. So that is something that one does need to look at, and not just be thinking about how do we decrease rates, but also after, even if we decrease that, if the banks are still slapping on obscene, you know, sort of markups to those rates, that could also impact the ultimate sort of pass-through effect or price effect of that of those rates, impacting on the general economic productivity and also growth in South Africa. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chairperson. Can I just add to the localization issue?
Right.
I think we also need to look at the effectiveness and the gains that we have gotten from the Black Industrial Program. It would not be surprising if you find the same challenges with access to the program that we are finding with the loan guarantee scheme. We need to look at the gains that we have gotten from the special economic zones. At local government level, we need to look at, are we geared and positioned to bring localization into our local economic development plans? I think these are all interrelated issues. The immediate gains we could have is if there is increased compliance and awareness of our spending entities, whether they are national departments, provincial departments, municipalities, SOEs, on the regulations and the provisions for localization. I think often that is something that tends to fall through the cracks still within our entities. And I think you made the point also to say it's good and well to look at the budget and what each department is getting and so forth. But we need also to begin to focus much stronger on the impact that our budget and our allocations in the appropriations or special appropriations bills are making. I think that is certainly a point that the FFC should also be taking forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Rockman. Thank you, commissioners and the team from FFC. Thank you very much for the input and the issues that I'm sure you have got a lot of bad costs from your side, on your side, and you also give us some bad costs, the things that we should look at as we interact with the different departments. Thank you very much. I think we can go to the next agenda item. You are free to remain on the platform, but if you also want to go and look at the things, the part cost that we have given you, you may leave. Thank you very much. Honorable members, let's go to the next agenda item. Let's look at the minutes of the 4th of May 2021. Let's go to those minutes. I hope they were sent to us.
Chairperson,
Honorable Lenzana.
I read the minutes, Chair. I move for adoption.
Can I have the seconder?
I can't second. I was not there.
Matafa.
Honorable Matafa is seconding the adoption of the minutes. So the minutes of the 4th of May 2021 are adopted as a true reflection of that meeting. Can we then jump to the minutes of the 5th of May 2021? Are we there?
Matafa, Chairperson, I move for the adoption of the minutes of the 5th of May 2021 as a true reflection of the happenings of the day. Thank you, Chair.
Honorable Matafa is moving for the adoption of the minutes. Can I have the seconder?
Yes, Lenzana seconding.
Honorable Lenzana, it's seconding the minutes, so the minutes are adopted. That takes care of the minutes. Darren, are there any announcements?
Chairperson, no announcements from my side.
Yeah, just remind the honorable members about the next meeting, and yeah, and why we're not meeting tomorrow.
The next meeting will be on Friday, Chairperson, with Department of Public Enterprises and SAA on the special appropriation bill.
What time?
9 o'clock, Chair.
Okay. Thank you so much. That's the meeting that we're supposed to have tomorrow, but we had to change it because the Department of Public Enterprises, they've got another engagement. Okay, thank you. Thank you, oral members. This takes care of today's business. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Peters.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, guys. Let me see you, Musa. Sifiso, ukone. Bavez. Okay, that's fine. That takes care of today's meeting, as I've said. Thank you. See you. Cheers.
Thanks, Chairperson.
Thank you.